In the glittering heights of the city, they were legends of a different kind of war. Olivia Henry was the untouchable heiress, the crown jewel of a multi-billion-dollar empire built on tradition and secrets. Sebastian Hudson was the vulture, the self-made titan who had spent a decade in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to tear that empire to the ground. For years, they were the perfect enemies, their hatred fueled by a bitter past and a rivalry that set the headlines ablaze. But in a single night of fire and betrayal, the world they knew was reduced to ash. When the smoke cleared, Olivia didn't find safety in the arms of her allies. She found it in the shadow of the one man she was taught to loathe. Forced into the unforgiving wilderness with a target on their backs, the lines between predator and prey began to blur. In the silence of the mountains, far from the reach of the city's lies, the heiress and the rogue would discover that the man who vowed to destroy her was the only one capable of saving her. Chapter 1. The Gala of Shadows. The grand ballroom of the Henry estate was a cathedral of glass, gold, and whispered lies. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen explosions from the vaulted ceiling, casting a fractured light over the elite of the city. To the world, this was the Henry Shipping 50th Anniversary Gala, a celebration of half a century of dominance. To Olivia Henry, it felt like a gilded cage. Olivia stood at the top of the marble staircase, her breath hitched behind a mask of practiced indifference. She was draped in a floor-length gown of midnight silk that shimmered like oil on water. Her dark hair was swept up, exposing the elegant line of her throat, where a $1 million diamond necklace rested, a weight that felt more like a collar than a piece of jewelry. "Smile, Olivia," a voice hissed beside her. She didn't turn to look at her Uncle Silas. He stood a head taller, his silver hair slicked back, his hand gripping a flute of champagne with a white-knuckled intensity. "The investors are watching. They don't want a CEO who looks like she's attending a funeral." "Maybe I'm mourning the truth, Silas," Olivia replied, her voice a low, melodic velvet. "We both know the quarterly reports are being held together by Scotch tape and prayers." "Just play your part," Silas warned, his smile never reaching his cold, predatory eyes. She stepped down into the fray, moving through the crowd like a swan among vultures. She shook hands, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, and accepted hollowed-out compliments. But the hair on the back of her neck was standing up. She felt a gaze, not the fleeting glance of a socialite, but a heavy, physical pressure. She turned, her glass of sparkling water frozen halfway to her lips. Standing by the arched balcony doors was the shadow in the room, Sebastian Hudson. He didn't belong here, yet he commanded the space better than any man in a tuxedo. He wore a charcoal black suit that fit his broad shoulders with lethal precision. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and shadows, punctuated by a thin, jagged scar that traced his jawline, a souvenir from his rise through the rougher streets of the shipping docks. His eyes, a piercing, stormy gray, were locked on hers. Sebastian Hudson was the man who had spent the last 3 years systematically dismantling Henry Shipping's contracts. He was the vulture, the rival who played dirty and won big. He was the man Olivia had been taught to loathe before she even knew his name. The crowd seemed to part as he walked towards her. The music, a sweeping, dramatic violin concerto, seemed to swell in time with his footsteps. "Mr. Hudson," Olivia said as he came to a halt a mere breath away. The scent of him hit her, sandalwood, rain, and something metallic, like a whetted blade. "I find that if you own enough of a person's debt, Olivia, doors tend to open themselves," Sebastian said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that vibrated in her chest. "You're bold coming here tonight," she whispered, stepping closer to mask their conversation. "My uncle has guards in every corner of this room." "I'm not afraid of the dogs, Olivia. I'm here to see the queen before her palace burns." He reached out, his gloved hand hovering near her waist. "Dance with me. It's a tradition for enemies to share a final meal, isn't it?" "This isn't a meal." "No," he whispered, leaning in so close his warmth cut through the chill of the air. "It's a warning." Before she could protest, his hand slid firmly onto the small of her back. The touch was electric, a jolt of pure, unadulterated friction that made her breath catch. He pulled her onto the dance floor. The world blurred. The violins screamed. As they moved, Sebastian's grip was unyielding. He didn't dance like a socialite. He moved with the predatory grace of a hunter. Olivia looked up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "What do you want, Sebastian?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and an emotion she refused to name. "I wanted to see if the rumors were true," he murmured, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that felt like a physical intrusion. "To see if you were as cold as the empire you represent. But your hands are shaking, Olivia, and your heart, it's beating fast enough to break." "It's rage," she snapped. "Is it?" He spun her, his hand sliding up her arm, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. "Or is it because you know that tonight everything changes? Look at your uncle. He isn't looking at the investors anymore. He's looking at the exits." Olivia glanced towards the balcony. Silas was gone. In his place stood two men in heavy tactical jackets, out of place among the silk and sequins. Her stomach dropped. "Sebastian, what is happening?" "The Henry legacy didn't just build ships, Olivia. It built enemies, and one of them just stopped waiting for the law to catch up." Suddenly the music stopped. Not a fade-out, but a violent, screeching halt. The massive glass dome above the ballroom shattered. A deafening crack echoed through the hall as a flashbang grenade detonated near the center stage. White light blinded Olivia. High-pitched ringing drowned out the screams of the guests. She felt herself falling, her heels sliding on the debris-strewn floor, but a pair of powerful arms caught her before she hit the ground. "Don't let go of me," Sebastian's voice roared over the chaos, no longer a whisper but a command. Black-clad figures began to rappel from the ceiling. Gunfire erupted, the rhythmic, terrifying thud-thud-thud of silenced weapons. The gold and glass of the Henry ballroom were being painted red. "My uncle," Olivia cried, trying to pull away, her eyes stinging from the smoke. "Silas is the one who left you here to die, Olivia." He pulled her behind a heavy mahogany bar as bullets tore through the expensive liquor bottles above them, raining gin and glass down on them. He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective light. "The exit is blocked. We have to go through the kitchens. If you want to live to see tomorrow, you move when I move. Do you understand?" Olivia looked at the man she had called her enemy for years. He was the only thing standing between her and the shadows closing in. "Yes," she whispered. "Good." Sebastian reached into his jacket, pulling out a compact handgun. The sight of it made her blood run cold. "Stay low, stay close, and for God's sake, Olivia, don't look back." As they sprinted into the darkness of the service corridors, the Henry estate behind them began to groan. A secondary explosion rocked the building, sending a wall of fire into the night sky. The gala was over. The war had begun.
Chapter 2. The Unlikely Savior. The air in the service corridors was thick with the smell of scorched ozone and expensive appetizers. Behind them, the ballroom was a furnace. Olivia's lungs burned, each breath a struggle against the rising smoke. Her midnight silk gown, once a symbol of her status, was now a treacherous tangle of fabric around her legs. "Sebastian, wait!" she gasped, her heel catching on a metal floor grate. He didn't just stop, he pivoted, his body acting as a human shield as he scanned the corridor behind them. The silence of the hallway was punctuated only by the distant, muffled screams from the gala and the rhythmic thump of heavy boots somewhere above them. "The shoes. Lose them," Sebastian commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. Olivia didn't argue. She kicked off the diamond-encrusted stilettos, her bare feet hitting the cold, industrial concrete. The transition felt symbolic. The heiress was gone. Only the survivor remained. "This way. My car is in the service bay," Sebastian whispered, grabbing her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, a grounding force in the middle of a nightmare. They reached the heavy steel doors of the loading dock. Sebastian pressed his back against the wall, peering through the small reinforced glass window. Outside, the rain was coming down in gray sheets, turning the estate's manicured gardens into a muddy battlefield. "There's a black SUV idling by the gate," Sebastian muttered, his jaw tightening. "Is it the police?" Olivia asked, her heart fluttering in her chest.
Sebastian looked at her, his expression grim. Police don't use darkened plates and suppressed submachine guns, Olivia. Those are Silas's cleaners. If they see you, they aren't here to rescue you. They're here to make sure you don't talk. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her uncle, the man who had tucked her in after her parents died, the man who had taught her how to read a balance sheet, had just tried to vaporize her in a ballroom. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "He has everything. The company, the house." "He has the title, but you have the voting shares," Sebastian said, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "He's tired of being the regent. He wants to be the king, and you're the only thing in his way." Sebastian checked his weapon, then looked at her. "When I open this door, we have 30 seconds to reach the drainage culvert behind the garage. If we try for the main road, we're dead. Do you trust me?" Olivia looked at the man she had spent years trying to ruin. He was the vulture, the man who had stolen her family's contracts. But in the dim light of the service exit, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected, a raw, burning integrity. "I don't have a choice," she said. "Wrong," replied Sebastian, his voice dropping to a low hum. "You always have a choice. I'm just the only one offering you a life." He threw the door open. The cold rain hit them like a wall of needles. They sprinted across the asphalt, the sound of their breathing ragged. Suddenly, a spotlight cut through the dark, sweeping across the pavement. "There!" a voice shouted from the SUV. Pop, pop, pop. The sound of suppressed gunfire was like the snapping of dry twigs. Sebastian shoved Olivia toward a stone retaining wall. "Get down." He leaned out, firing 3 precise shots. The SUV's headlights shattered, and the engine hissed as a bullet found the radiator. Sebastian didn't wait to see the results. He scooped Olivia up, his arm hooking under her knees, and vaulted over the wall into the dense, unkempt woods that bordered the estate. They tumbled down a muddy embankment, sliding through thorns and wet leaves until they hit the bottom of a ravine. Olivia's dress was ruined, her skin scratched, and her heart felt like it was going to burst through her ribs. Above them, the estate was a silhouette of orange flames against the black sky. "We have to keep moving," Sebastian said, pulling her to her feet. He was limping slightly, his suit jacket torn at the shoulder. "You're hurt," she noticed, her eyes widening. "It's a graze. I've had worse from board meetings," he grunted, though his face was pale. He pulled a radio from his pocket. "Marcus, do you read me? The extraction point is compromised. We're heading for the secondary site. Tell me the north road is clear." A static-filled voice crackled back. "Marcus, Sebastian's brother." "Seb? Thank God. No, the north road is crawling with security. Silas has declared a lockdown. He's telling the media it was a terrorist attack and that you kidnapped Olivia. Every cop in the state is looking for your car." Olivia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "He's framing you." "Of course he is," Sebastian said, a dark, cynical smile touching his lips. "It's a perfect plan. He kills the heiress, blames the rival, and inherits the empire. He's more efficient than I gave him credit for." "We have to go to the police," Olivia insisted. "I can tell them—" "Tell them what?" Sebastian stepped closer, his presence looming in the dark. "The man who just kidnapped you is the one they should believe? Silas has the police in his pocket, Olivia. If you walk into a station tonight, you won't make it to the interrogation room." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face before he pulled back. "The only place you're safe is with me. My family has a cabin in the Ridge Mountains. It's off the grid. No cameras, no signal, no Silas. We go there, we stay low, and we plan our counterstrike." The rain intensified, drenching them both. Olivia looked back at the burning remains of her life, then at the man who was supposed to be her enemy. The world she knew was gone. "Okay," she whispered, her voice lost in the thunder. "Take me to the mountains." Sebastian nodded, his expression softening for a fleeting second. He took off his torn suit jacket and draped it over her shivering shoulders. It was warm, smelling of him and the fading scent of the gala. "Stay close, Olivia," he said, leading her deeper into the dark woods. "The hunt has just begun."
Chapter 3. Into the Wilds. The black armored SUV roared up the winding mountain pass, its tires churning through thick mud and slush. Inside, the silence was heavy. broken only by the rhythmic hum of the engine and the frantic beating of Olivia's heart. Through the tinted windows, the world had turned into a blur of jagged pines and looming shadows. Sebastian sat behind the wheel, his jaw set like granite. His knuckles were white against the leather of the steering wheel. He hadn't spoken since they cleared the city limits, his eyes darting constantly to the rear-view mirror, watching for headlights that never came. "How much further?" Olivia finally whispered. She was huddled in the passenger seat, wrapped in Sebastian's oversized suit jacket. The silk of her dress was damp and cold against her skin, a constant reminder of the life she had left behind in the flames. 10 miles, maybe less," Sebastian replied, his voice a low vibration. "The road turns into a logging trail soon. It's too narrow for a standard police cruiser or a heavy SUV. If they're following us, they'll have to do it on foot." As the vehicle climbed higher, the rain turned into a blinding, heavy sleet. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up. The luxury Olivia had known her entire life, climate-controlled penthouses and heated marble floors, felt like a dream from another lifetime. Here, the world was raw, indifferent, and dangerous. Suddenly, the SUV jolted, a loud thud echoed from beneath the chassis, followed by the sickening sound of metal grinding against stone. The vehicle lurched to the left, sliding toward the edge of the steep embankment. "Sebastian!" Olivia cried out, her hands flying to the dashboard. "I've got it." He wrestled with the wheel, his muscles straining against the steering column. With a violent heave, he guided the SUV away from the cliffside and brought it to a shuddering halt against a wall of rock. Silence rushed back into the cabin, more terrifying than the noise. Sebastian cursed under his breath, hitting the steering wheel once in frustration. He climbed out into the storm, the wind howling through the open door. Olivia watched through the glass, her breath fogging the window as she saw him disappear into the dark. A few moments later he returned, drenched and grim-faced. "The axle is bent. We hit a submerged boulder in the mud," he said, reaching into the back seat for a tactical rucksack. "We're walking the rest of the way." "Walking? In this?" Olivia looked out at the vertical wall of forest and the freezing sleet. "Sebastian, I don't even have shoes." He looked down at her bare, pale feet, then back at her face. For a moment, the vulture softened. He reached into the bag and pulled out a pair of thick wool hiking socks and a spare set of boots that looked 3 sizes too big. "Double up the socks, tie the laces tight," he commanded, though his tone was less of an order and more of a necessity. "It's 2 miles uphill. If we stay here, we're sitting ducks for Silas's men or the storm. Choose one, Olivia, but choose fast." 15 minutes later, they were moving through the brush. The Into the Wilds experience was far more brutal than Olivia had ever imagined. Every step was a battle. The oversized boots felt like lead weights, and the hem of her gown kept snagging on briars. Sebastian led the way, using a small, shielded flashlight to cut through the gloom. He didn't offer to carry her, and Olivia didn't ask. There was a strange, prickly pride growing in her chest, a refusal to be the damsel her uncle thought she was. "Why do you have a cabin out here?" she asked, her voice trembling from the cold. "It doesn't exactly fit your billionaire playboy image." "My father built it," Sebastian said without looking back, "before your father took his company and drove him into an early grave. It was the only thing the Henry lawyers couldn't touch because it was in my mother's maiden name." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut through the wind. Olivia flinched. "I didn't know about any of that, Sebastian. I was a child." "Ignorance is a luxury of the rich, Olivia." He stopped abruptly, turning to face her. The sleet hung in his eyelashes. "But you aren't rich anymore, Olivia. You're a fugitive, and right now the only thing that matters is that cabin." He pointed through a break in the trees. Perched on a rocky outcropping was a small, sturdy structure made of dark timber and stone. It looked lonely, defiant against the mountain. As they reached the porch, the sky let out a final, deafening crack of thunder. Sebastian kicked the heavy wooden door open and shoved Olivia inside, slamming it shut behind them and throwing the heavy iron bolt. The interior was pitch black and smelled of cedar and old ash. The wind whistled through the eaves, but the walls were thick. They were safe. Olivia collapsed against the door, her legs finally giving out. She slid down to the floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The adrenaline that had carried her from the ballroom was evaporating, leaving behind a cold, hollow terror. "We're here," Sebastian said, his voice echoing in the dark. He struck a match, the tiny flame illuminating the sharp planes of his face. He lit an oil lamp on the table. The golden glow filled the room, casting long, flickering shadows. Olivia looked up at him, her enemy, her savior, her only companion in a world that wanted her dead. "I think," Olivia whispered, shivering violently, "the danger started a long time ago."
Chapter 4. Cracks in the Armor. The cabin was a hollow shell of cold and shadow until Sebastian coaxed a fire to life in the massive stone hearth. The first few sparks were agonizingly slow to catch, mirroring the frozen state of Olivia's spirit. When the flames finally roared, casting a dancing orange glow across the timber walls, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an exposure. "Get out of those wet clothes," Sebastian said. He didn't look at her. He was busy hauling a heavy wool blanket from a cedar chest. Olivia, huddled on a moth-eaten rug by the fire, looked up at him, her eyes wide. I don't have anything else to wear, Sebastian." He paused, his back to her. With a heavy sigh, he walked to a small dresser and pulled out a thick, charcoal-gray flannel shirt and a pair of drawstring athletic pants. He tossed them onto the rug beside her. "They'll be huge on you. Use the string to tie the waist," he muttered. "I'm going to the porch to check the perimeter. I'll give you 5 minutes." When the door clicked shut behind him, the silence of the cabin pressed in on her. Olivia stripped away the ruined midnight silk. It fell to the floor in a sodden, glittering heap, the last relic of the girl who had stood at the top of a marble staircase just hours ago. As she pulled on Sebastian's shirt, the scent of him, wood smoke and something deeply masculine, enveloped her. The fabric was rough against her skin, but it was warm. It was the first time she had felt warm in an eternity. When Sebastian returned, he was dripping wet, his face drawn with pain. He moved stiffly, his left arm pinned close to his side. He sat on a wooden stool by the fire, his breath hitching. "Sebastian," Olivia said, stepping into the light. The oversized clothes made her look small, fragile, yet somehow more real than she ever had in her diamonds. "You're bleeding again." The dark fabric of his dress shirt was plastered to his shoulder, soaked with a mixture of rain and deep crimson blood. "It's just a graze," he grunted, reaching for a first aid kit he had pulled from the rucksack. He tried to unbutton his shirt, but his fingers, numbed by the cold and shaking from the adrenaline crash, failed him. He let out a low growl of frustration. "Let me," Olivia said. He looked up, his gray eyes piercing. "I don't need your pity, Olivia." "It's a trade," she countered, her voice regaining some of her corporate steel. "You saved my life. The least I can do is make sure you don't bleed out on my only source of heat." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then Sebastian slumped his shoulders in a silent surrender. Olivia knelt between his knees, her heart hammered against her ribs as she reached out. Her fingers, usually reserved for signing million-dollar contracts, trembled as they touched the first button of his shirt. She worked slowly, peeling back the wet fabric. As the shirt fell away, she gasped. It wasn't just the gunshot wound, a jagged, ugly furrow across his deltoid. It was the rest of him. His torso was a map of old scars. Faded white lines across his ribs, a jagged mark near his collarbone. "Sebastian," her breath caught. "Where did all of these come from?" "The world doesn't hand out empires to boys from the docks, Olivia," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "I had to fight for every inch of ground your father took from mine. Some of those are from his security teams, some are from the streets. They're reminders." Olivia cleaned the wound with antiseptic, her touch surprisingly gentle. Sebastian hissed as the liquid stung, his muscles jumping under her touch. To distract him, and perhaps herself, she leaned in closer. The heat from the fire radiated between them, and the air seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. "I always thought you were just a shark," she whispered, her eyes focused on her task. "Someone who liked the sport of the kill. I didn't know it was a war." "It's always been a war. You were just kept in the bunkers," Sebastian replied. He looked down at her. From this distance, he could see the faint freckles on her nose and the way her damp lashes cast long shadows on her cheeks. "You were the face of the enemy, Olivia. I spent 10 years hating that face." She looked up, her hand pausing on his shoulder. "And now?" Sebastian's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The hatred was there, but it was flickering, being smothered by a new, more dangerous heat. He reached out with his good hand, his thumb grazing the line of her jaw. His skin was hot, his touch heavy with a sudden, localized gravity. "And now," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave, "the face is different, and the enemy is the only person in the world I have left." Olivia didn't pull away. She couldn't. The cracks in the armor weren't just showing, the armor was shattering. For the first time, she didn't see the man who wanted to destroy her company. She saw the man who had stayed in a burning building to find her. The tension was a physical weight, pulling them closer until their foreheads almost touched. Sebastian moved to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her dark, damp hair. The wind shrieked outside, shaking the cabin to its foundations, but inside, the world had narrowed down to the space between their heartbeats. "Olivia," he breathed, a warning and a plea all at once. "I know," she whispered. Just as the distance between them vanished, the small radio in Sebastian's discarded jacket crackled to life with a burst of static. "Seb? Seb, do you copy? It's Marcus." The spell broke. Sebastian jerked back, his expression instantly hardening into the mask of the strategist once more. He grabbed the radio, his movements sharp and professional, leaving Olivia cold and breathless in the firelight. "I'm here, Marcus. Report." "It's bad, brother. Silas just went live on the news. He's offering a $5 million reward for Olivia's recovery. He's branded you a domestic terrorist. He's not just hunting us anymore. He's turned the whole world against us." Olivia sank back on her heels, the warmth of the fire suddenly feeling like a mockery. The armor was back on, but the cracks remained, glowing like embers in the dark. Chapter 5. The Truth in the Dark. The flickering oil lamp cast long, distorted shadows against the cabin walls, making the room feel smaller, more intimate, and more dangerous. Outside, the mountain wind howled like a wounded beast, but inside, the silence was louder. Sebastian sat at the small wooden table, the glow of the fire catching the sharp edge of his jaw. He had pulled a weather-beaten leather satchel from a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. From it, he produced a stack of yellowed documents and a sleek, encrypted tablet. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Sebastian said, his voice cutting through the quiet. Olivia was wrapped in a heavy quilt, sitting on the edge of the hearth. "I'm looking at the man the entire world thinks is a monster. My uncle is on every news channel calling you a murderer." "And you?" Sebastian looked up, his gray eyes steady. "Do you think I'm a monster, Olivia?" "I don't know what to think anymore," she whispered. "Everything I thought was solid, my family, my name, it's all turning to ash." "Then let's finish the job," Sebastian said. He slid a folder across the table toward her. You've spent your life looking at the polished surface of Henry Shipping. It's time you saw the engine room." Olivia hesitated, then stood and walked to the table. Her hand trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were bank transfers, shipping manifests with altered destinations, and private correspondence dating back 20 years. "What is this?" "Evidence," Sebastian said, his tone cold and precise. 10 years ago, my father's company, Hudson Maritime, was on the verge of a breakthrough in green engine technology. Your father and Silas didn't just outcompete him, they sabotaged his fleet, bribed the inspectors to declare his ships unseaworthy, and then bought the remains of the company for pennies while my father sat in a boardroom, broken. She shook her head, her eyes scanning the signatures at the bottom of the memos. "My father? He wouldn't. He was a good man." "He was a man who wanted to build a legacy," Sebastian countered, stepping closer. "And Silas was the one willing to get blood on his hands to make sure it happened. Look at the last page, Olivia. Look at the date." Olivia flipped to the final document. It was a wire transfer for a massive sum of money sent to an offshore account the day before her parents' fatal accident in the Mediterranean. The authorizing signature wasn't her father's. It was Silas's. "He didn't just kill my father's dream," Sebastian whispered, his breath warm against her temple as he leaned over to look at the paper. "He killed your parents because your father was starting to grow a conscience. He was going to the authorities to confess everything. Silas couldn't let that happen." The world tilted. Olivia felt the air leave her lungs. She gripped the edge of the table, the rough wood digging into her palms. The man she had mourned, the man she had tried to honor by running the company, had been murdered by the very person who had raised her. "I've been his puppet," she choked out, a single tear tracking through the soot on her cheek. "He used me to keep the shareholders happy while he bled the company dry." Sebastian reached out, his hand covering hers on the table. It wasn't the grip of a captor, it was a steadying weight. "You were a shield, Olivia. He hid behind your reputation because you were untouchable. But the moment you started asking about the missing funds last month, you became a liability." Olivia turned to him, her eyes bright with a mixture of grief and a newfound burning rage. "You didn't come to the gala to ruin the company. You came to save me." Sebastian's expression shifted, the cold strategist's mask slipping for a heartbeat. "I came to expose the truth. Saving you, that was an impulse I'm still trying to justify to myself." The tension in the room shifted from the horror of the past to the electricity of the present. Olivia saw the conflict in his eyes, the battle between the man who wanted revenge and the man who was falling for the daughter of his enemy. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why risk everything for me?" Sebastian stepped into her space, his presence overwhelming. He didn't answer with words. He reached out, his thumb catching the tear on her cheek. His touch was agonizingly slow, a gentle contrast to the violence of the world outside. "Because," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips, "I realized that if I let you burn with the rest of them, there wouldn't be anything left in this world worth winning." In the dark of the cabin, with the truth laid bare between them, the last of Olivia's defenses crumbled. She didn't see the vulture anymore. She saw a man who had been alone in his war for too long, just as Olivia had been alone in her palace. She reached up, her fingers sliding into the hair at the nape of his neck, and pulled him down. When their lips finally met, it wasn't a soft, romantic gesture. It was a collision, a desperate, hungry claim born of survival and years of suppressed friction. It tasted of salt and wood smoke. It was the only honest thing Olivia had felt in years. Sebastian groaned low in his throat, his arms wrapping around her waist and lifting her until she was pressed against the edge of the table. In that moment, they weren't Hudson and Henry. They weren't rivals. They were two broken pieces finally fitting together in the dark. But as the fire died down to embers, a low, rhythmic thumping sound began to vibrate through the floorboards. It wasn't the wind. Sebastian pulled back, his eyes instantly turning toward the ceiling. Helicopter. "Is it Marcus?" Olivia asked, her heart racing for a different reason now. Sebastian reached for his weapon, his face hardening. "No, Marcus doesn't have a thermal imaging bird. Silas found us."
Chapter 6. The Thaw. "Lights out, now!" Sebastian didn't wait for her to move. He lunged across the room, blowing out the oil lamp and sweeping a heavy blanket over the dying embers of the fire. The cabin plunged into a thick, suffocating blackness, save for the violent, rhythmic flashes of light cutting through the window panes. The whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of the rotor blades was deafening now, shaking the very timber of the walls. A powerful searchlight swept across the floor, a predatory eye looking for a sign of life. Sebastian grabbed Olivia's hand, his grip firm and grounding. He led her to the small trap door behind the kitchen counter, the cold cellar. They dropped down into the cramped earthen space, the scent of damp soil and aged wood pressing in on them. He pulled the door shut, just as the sound of the helicopter hovered directly overhead, the downdraft screaming against the roof. They were huddled together in the dark, their chests heaving. Olivia was pressed against Sebastian's side, her head tucked under his chin. She could hear his heart, a steady, powerful drumbeat that refused to yield to terror. "They're going to find us," she whispered, the vibration of her own voice lost in the roar above. "The snow is too thick for a landing," Sebastian breathed into her hair. "They're flying blind on thermal. As long as the fire is out and we stay low, we're just a cold shadow on their screen." Minutes felt like hours. The light flickered through the cracks in the floorboards above them, a ghost hunting for its prey. Olivia felt a shudder rack her body, not from the cold of the cellar, but from the realization of how close they were to the end. Sebastian's arms tightened around her. He wasn't just holding her, he was shielding her. In the absolute darkness, the barriers they had spent years building finally dissolved. There was no vulture, no heiress. There were only two souls caught in a storm. "I used to watch you," Sebastian said, his voice a low rasp that seemed to come from the very earth around them. Olivia shifted, looking up toward where she knew his face was. "What?" "At the galas, the board meetings, I told myself I was studying my enemy, looking for a weakness," he confessed. "But I was looking for the girl behind the mask. I saw how you looked when you thought no one was watching, how tired you were of carrying the weight of a name you didn't choose." Olivia swallowed hard, her hand finding the fabric of his shirt. "I hated you because you were free. You were the only person who looked at me and didn't see a Henry. You saw me, even if you hated what you saw." "I never hated you, Olivia," he whispered, his hand cupping her cheek in the dark. "I hated that I couldn't stop thinking about you. I hated that every time I tried to strike at your company, I was worried about how it would hurt you." The helicopter's roar began to fade, the sound drifting toward the eastern ridge. The searchlight vanished, leaving them in a silence so profound it felt heavy. Olivia reached up, her fingers tracing the scar on his jaw. "We spent so much time on opposite sides of the glass. I don't want to go back to that." "There is no going back," Sebastian said. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. The thaw was complete. The coldness that had defined their lives, the isolation of power and the bitterness of revenge was melting away, replaced by a terrifying, beautiful heat. "If we get out of this," Olivia asked, "what are we?" Sebastian was silent for a heartbeat. He took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers, anchoring her to him. "We're the ones who survive, and then we're the ones who take it all back." He pushed the cellar door open. The cabin was freezing now, the fire long dead, but as they stood up together, the air felt different. They weren't just running anymore. They were a team. Sebastian checked the tablet Marcus had sent. The signal was weak, but a message flashed on the screen. "Path cleared to the valley.
Moving now is your only chance. Get your coat, Olivia, Sebastian said, his eyes catching the faint moonlight reflecting off the snow. It's time to stop hiding. We're going to find Silas.
Chapter 7. The Betrayal. The transition from the raw, honest cold of the mountains to the sterile, artificial warmth of the city outskirts felt like a descent into a different kind of purgatory. Sebastian had navigated them through the valley to a black site, a glass-walled penthouse atop a half-finished skyscraper he had purchased through a shell company. Inside, the air was stale, and the city lights twinkled below like a sea of fallen stars. "Stay away from the windows," Sebastian cautioned, his eyes tired but alert. He went straight to a server rack in the corner, his fingers flying across a keyboard as he tried to re-establish a secure link with Marcus. "We need the encryption keys for Silas's private server. Once we have those, we have his confession." Olivia paced the length of the polished concrete floor. She was wearing a fresh set of clothes from a stash in the apartment, black tactical gear that felt like a uniform for a war she hadn't realized she was drafted into. "I feel like a ghost," she murmured, looking at her reflection in a dark television screen. "The news says I'm dead, or worse, a captive." "You're neither," Sebastian said, his voice softening. He stepped away from the monitors and walked toward her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, the heat of his touch cutting through her anxiety. "We're almost there, Olivia. One more day and you'll have your life back." "I don't want my old life back," she whispered, leaning into him. "I want a life where I don't have to wonder who is trying to kill me." Sebastian leaned down, his lips brushing her forehead. "I promise you." The computer chimed. A data packet had arrived. "Marcus?" Sebastian turned to the screen. "Wait, this isn't from Marcus. It's an internal Henry shipping relay." He frowned, clicking through the files. "It's a dump of audio logs from the night of the gala, Silas's personal recordings." Olivia stepped up beside him, her heart skipping a beat. "Is it the proof we need?" "Let's see." Sebastian hit play. The speakers crackled. A voice filled the room. Sebastian's voice. "The gala is the perfect time," the recording of Sebastian said, his tone cold and calculating. "Let the mercenaries make the first move. If Olivia is terrified, she'll run to the only person who isn't a Henry. I'll be her hero, and by the time we're in the mountains, she'll sign those voting shares over just to stay alive." The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. She stepped back, her boots clicking sharply on the concrete. "Sebastian?" Sebastian stood frozen, staring at the monitor. "Olivia, that isn't me. I never said that. It's a deep fake. Silas is using my voice profile." "It sounds exactly like you," she whispered, her voice trembling. She grabbed the tablet on the desk, scrolling through the files. There were maps of the gala with extraction points marked in Sebastian's handwriting. There were photos of her taken weeks ago, surveillance photos. "You were following me. You were planning this." "I was following you to protect you from him," Sebastian roared, his frustration boiling over. He reached for her, but she flinched away as if his touch were poison. "Did you let them shoot at me?" she demanded, tears stinging her eyes. "Was the graze on your shoulder part of the act? Did you make me feel sorry for you just so I'd let my guard down?" "Look at me," he pleaded, his gray eyes desperate. "Think about the cabin. Think about the way I looked at you. You think I can act that well?" "I think you've spent 10 years hating my family," she choked out. "And I think you're a man who knows how to play a long game. You didn't want to destroy the empire from the outside. You wanted me to hand you the keys from the inside." "That's Silas talking. He's in the system. He's trying to separate us because he knows we're stronger together." But the seeds of doubt had been planted in a mind already ravaged by trauma.
Olivia looked at the man who had been her enemy for a decade, and then at the man who had kissed her in the dark. The line between them blurred into a terrifying smear of gray. "I can't do this," she sobbed. "I don't know who is the monster anymore." Before he could stop her, she turned and bolted for the service elevator. "Olivia, stop!" She didn't stop. She hit the button, the doors sliding shut just as Sebastian reached the threshold. She watched through the small glass pane as he slammed his fist against the steel, his face contorted in a mask of pure agony. She reached the lobby, her mind a whirlwind of static and pain. She burst through the doors into the rainy city night, looking for a way out, for anyone she could trust. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. The door opened. "Olivia, thank God." It was Silas. He looked haggard, his face filled with a perfect, practiced relief. He stepped out, holding his arms open. "We tracked your signal. We thought he'd killed you." Olivia looked back at the skyscraper, then at her uncle. She felt like she was stepping from one fire into another, but the evidence on the tablet was screaming in her ears. She collapsed into Silas's arms, weeping. Over her shoulder, Silas looked up at the penthouse window. He didn't see Sebastian, but he knew he was there. A slow, triumphant smile spread across the old man's face. "Get her in the car," Silas commanded, his voice dropping the facade of the grieving uncle, "and prepare the suicide note for Mr. Hudson. We're ending this tonight."
Chapter 8. Into the Lion's Den. The Henry estate was no longer a home. It was a fortress of cold marble and silent men with earpieces. Olivia sat in her father's old study, the heavy oak doors locked from the outside. The scent of expensive cigars and old money, which used to spell comfort, now felt like the smell of a tomb. Silas stood by the window, watching the rain wash over the gardens where the gala had been decimated only nights before. He turned, tossing a leather-bound folder onto the desk in front of her. "Sign them, Olivia. Let's end this charade," Silas said. His voice was no longer the soothing tone of a worried uncle. It was the flat, metallic rasp of a man who had long ago traded his soul for a ledger. Olivia looked at the documents. It was a total divestment of her shares, a complete handover of the Henry legacy to Silas. "I saw the recordings, Silas," Olivia said, her voice trembling but her eyes fixed on him. "But I also saw your face when the car door closed. You didn't look relieved. You looked like you were checking your watch." Silas chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "You were always the smart one. Too smart for your own good, just like your father. He started asking questions about the Mediterranean routes. He started talking about accountability. I couldn't have that, and I can't have you poking around the books anymore." "You killed them," she whispered. The truth, finally confirmed, felt like a cold blade in her chest. "I secured the future," Silas corrected, "and now I'm going to secure yours. You'll sign those papers. Then the world will hear the tragic news. Olivia Henry, broken by the kidnapping and the betrayal of Sebastian Hudson, took her own life in a fit of despair. Sebastian will be found a few miles away, killed while resisting arrest. 2 birds, 1 stone." Olivia felt a surge of ice-cold clarity. She looked at the pen, then at the man across from her. She realized that everything Sebastian had told her was true. He hadn't been the enemy. He had been the mirror, showing her the ugly truth she was too afraid to see. "He's coming for me," Olivia said. Silas laughed, leaning over the desk. "Let him. I have 30 armed men on the perimeter and a thermal grid that can see a rabbit twitch at 500 yards. If Sebastian Hudson steps foot on this property, he'll be a corpse before he reaches the driveway." Outside the gates, hidden in the shadow of a drainage pipe, Sebastian Hudson pulled a tactical earpiece into place. His suit was gone, replaced by matte black gear. His face was set in a mask of lethal focus. "Marcus, talk to me," Sebastian whispered. I'm in their server, Seb. Silas's security is top tier, but they're arrogant. They've bypassed the local grid to run their own encrypted signal. I'm feeding them a looped video of the north perimeter. You have exactly 90 seconds before the guard rotation catches the glitch. That's 60 seconds more than I need. He moved like a shadow, a ghost fueled by a singular, burning purpose. He didn't just want to take Silas down, he wanted to get to Olivia. The memory of the look on her face when she left the penthouse, the heartbreak and the doubt, tore at him more than any bullet ever could. He scaled the perimeter wall with practiced ease, dropping silently onto the wet grass. He was deep in the lion's den now. Inside the study, Olivia heard a faint, rhythmic clicking. She looked toward the vent in the ceiling. It was the sound of the HVAC system being cycled. 3 short bursts, 1 long. A code. Sebastian. He was in the vents, or he was close. She looked at Silas, who was pouring himself a celebratory drink. She had to create a distraction. She had to be the perfect Henry one last time. Fine, Olivia said, picking up the pen. I'll sign, but I want to see the offshore accounts first. I want to know exactly how much my life was worth to you. Silas turned, a greedy glint in his eyes. Always the negotiator. Very well. As Silas walked toward the wall safe to retrieve the ledgers, Olivia didn't look at the papers. She looked at the heavy brass lamp on the corner of the desk. She gripped the base, her knuckles white. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a Hudson's partner, and she was ready to fight.
Chapter 9. The Climax. Fire and Ice. The study door didn't just open, it exploded off its hinges. Silas spun around, his drink shattering on the hardwood, but he was too slow. A flashbang grenade skidded across the floor, detonating in a blinding white roar. "Olivia, down!" She didn't need to be told. She dove behind the heavy oak desk just as the room was plunged into chaos. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of Sebastian's suppressed weapon. Smoke filled the air, swirling around the red emergency strobes that had begun to pulse. Through the haze, a figure emerged, dark, lethal, and familiar. Sebastian moved with a terrifying efficiency, neutralizing the 2 guards Silas had posted at the door before they could even level their rifles. "Sebastian!" Olivia cried out, her voice a mix of terror and relief. He reached her in 2 strides, hauling her up from behind the desk. He didn't say a word. He simply pulled her into a brief, crushing embrace, his heart hammering against her chest. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, checking for injuries. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, the words tumbling out. "I shouldn't have believed—" "Later," Sebastian rasped, his eyes darting to the hallway. "We have to move. Silas is heading for the helipad. He has the servers on a hard drive. If he leaves with them, the truth dies with him." "Not all of it," Olivia said, reaching into the desk drawer and pulling out the signed transfer of power, the one she had secretly altered with a handwritten confession she'd forced Silas to mutter while she stalled. "I have enough." They ran. The estate had become a war zone. Silas's mercenaries were closing in, their boots thundering on the marble floors. Sebastian led her through the gallery, his body always positioned between her and the threat. "Cover your ears," Sebastian shouted, turning to fire at a glass partition. The shards rained down like diamonds, creating a barrier for their pursuers. They reached the grand balcony overlooking the cliffs. The rain was a torrential downpour now, lightning illuminating the scene in jagged blue-white flashes. At the edge of the helipad, Silas stood, his silver hair windswept and wild. He held a silver briefcase in one hand and a flare gun in the other. "Stop!" Silas screamed over the roar of the wind. "One more step and I drop the drive into the surf. You'll have nothing. No company, no name, no justice." Sebastian leveled his gun at Silas's chest, his finger tightening on the trigger. "The name is already gone, Silas. We're just here for the man." You think you've won, Silas laughed, a desperate, high-pitched sound. Look at her, Sebastian. She's a Henry. She'll turn on you the moment the dust settles. It's in her blood. Olivia stepped forward, moving past Sebastian's shoulder. She looked at the man who had stolen her childhood and murdered her parents. The fear that had paralyzed her for years was gone, replaced by a cold, absolute resolve. "You're wrong, Uncle," Olivia said, her voice carrying over the storm. "I'm not a Henry. I'm the girl who survived you, and the blood on my hands, it's from the people you hurt. It's time to pay." A searchlight from a distant police chopper suddenly cut through the dark, pinning Silas in its beam. Marcus had done it. He had bypassed the local blackout and alerted the authorities. "Drop the case, Silas!" a voice boomed from the sky. Silas looked at the cliff, then at Olivia, and finally at Sebastian. In a final, spiteful act, he hurled the briefcase toward the crashing waves below. "If I can't have it, nobody!" Sebastian didn't hesitate. He didn't shoot, he lunged. He caught the handle of the briefcase just as Silas lost his footing on the slick stone. For a heartbeat, Sebastian held the evidence in one hand and Silas's coat in the other, dangling over the abyss. Sebastian looked into Silas's panicked eyes. He could have let go. He could have ended the war right there. "Sebastian, don't!" Olivia's voice was a plea for him, not for Silas. "Don't let him turn you into what he is." Sebastian's jaw tightened. With a roar of effort, he hauled Silas back onto the solid stone, slamming him face down on the wet tiles. Within seconds, the balcony was swarmed by tactical police units. Silas was dragged away, screaming about legacies and empires, his voice eventually swallowed by the wind. Sebastian stood panting, the silver briefcase gripped in his hand. He turned to Olivia. He was drenched, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, and exhausted. Olivia didn't wait. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder. The rain washed away the soot and the tears, leaving only the two of them. "You saved it," she whispered, looking at the briefcase. "I saved what mattered," he replied, dropping the case to the floor and wrapping his arms around her. As the sirens wailed in the distance and the fires of the estate were slowly extinguished by the storm, the enemy and the heiress stood together in the ruins of the old world, ready for the first dawn of the new. Chapter 10. A New Legacy. The Mediterranean sun was a warm, golden weight against Olivia's shoulders, a stark contrast to the freezing sleet of the Ridge Mountains. From the terrace of the villa, the water below was a brilliant, shimmering turquoise, dotted with the white sails of ships that finally carried a cargo of hope instead of secrets. Olivia sipped her coffee, wearing a simple white linen dress. The ice queen of the Henry Empire had melted away, replaced by a woman whose smiles actually reached her eyes. The sound of footsteps on the stone tiles made her heart do that familiar, fluttering dance. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The scent of sandalwood and sea salt preceded him. Sebastian leaned against the railing beside her, his dark hair ruffled by the breeze. He looked younger without the weight of a decade-long vendetta on his shoulders. The scar on his jaw was still there, but it no longer looked like a mark of war. It looked like a badge of survival. "The board meeting just wrapped up in London," Sebastian said, his voice a low, pleasant hum. "The merger is official. Hudson Henry Maritime has officially retired the old fleet. The first hydrogen-powered vessel launches next month." Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder. "My father would have loved that. He was a dreamer before he became a captive of his own success." "And Silas?" "The sentencing came through this morning," she said, her voice steady. "Life without parole. He'll never see the inside of a boardroom again." Sebastian turned to her, taking her hand in his. His touch still sent that same electric jolt through her, but now it was anchored by a deep, abiding peace. "It's over, Olivia. The war, the shadows, the ghosts. It's just us now. Was it worth it? She asked softly, looking out at the horizon. Everything we lost to get here? Sebastian reached out, tucking a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. His expression was more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. I'd burn 1,000 estates to find you in the smoke again. You weren't a loss, Olivia. You were the only thing I ever truly won. The vulture had found his home. The heiress had found her freedom. In the silence that followed, there was no need for the sharp wit or the guarded defenses that had defined their first meeting at the gala. They were no longer the pieces on a chessboard. They were the ones who had flipped the table and walked away together. So, Olivia whispered, a playful spark in her eyes, what does a retired enemy do with the rest of his life? Sebastian pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist as he drew her into the warmth of his chest. He looked down at her, his gray eyes burning with a fire that had nothing to do with destruction and everything to do with the woman in his arms. He spends every day proving that danger didn't just make us survivors, it made us soulmates. As he kissed her, the world behind them faded into a blur of blue and gold. The story that had begun with a dance between enemies ended with a promise between equals. The Henry and Hudson names would go down in history, but here, under the sun, they were simply Sebastian and Olivia. And for the first time in their lives, the future was an open sea.